There's been much talk, some of it uninformed, about moves to democracy in the Middle East. The one Muslim country with a democratic government, recently re-elected after 9 years in power, is Turkey. Could we now see it more forcefully exert its influence in this troubled region? I'm Colin Chapman, and welcome to Agenda with George Friedman. George, you've recently been to Istanbul. Is it likely we'll now see Turkey as a change activist?
Ankara has already been changing the region simply by being there. The most important aspect of Turkey has been its extraordinary growth rate. Last year it grew by 8.9%. There's some expectation of a slowdown or a recession, but in any case, it is growing dramatically, and that's reshaping the region. Because as an economic power, perhaps one of the greater economic powers in the world today, obviously it's influencing everyone else. Turkey is also struggling with the question of what its role is. It has a policy of no trouble with neighbors, but of course that's not a practical thing for a country as powerful as Turkey with as diverse a collection of neighbors as it has. So I think this is going to be the term in which the Turks are really going to be addressing some of the fundamental issues of their foreign policy, what their interests are, what their role is going to be. And I think the events in the Arab world are one of the things that are going to push them in this direction.
Until now, it's been propelled by its domestic agenda. In foreign affairs, it's been perhaps punching below its weight.
Well, all countries are influenced by the domestic agenda, and all countries think their domestic agenda is more troublesome and complex than any other country's. It's one of the standard beliefs. So the Turks have been absorbed in their domestic issues, which is the question of the relationship of secularism to Islam. And for the Turks, as for any other country, this is the pressing and overwhelming issue, which is more difficult than for any other country. I'm not sure that I would agree that Turkey has been punching below its weight. I think Turkey has been punching at its weight, which is to say that many of the institutions that Turkey has to develop to operate in foreign policy, for example, a large enough domestic corps, a intelligence service with enough reach, an aid program. I mean, the nuts and bolts of great powers aren't there yet. Right now, it is primarily a top-level set of relationships that are influencing. And if you were to ask them, even with the large army they have, to intervene deeply in Iraq, they may not be able to do it, let alone want to do it. I think Turkey has developed for what for me is an expected fashion as a great power. I think it is having substantial influence in the region, but I don't think that it has power that it's not using. It has to still develop a great deal of power to be effective.
You mentioned Syria. Islamists in Syria were delighted at the results of the recent election, and I see that Turkey's Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu has been in Damascus 60 times in 8 years. Do you think he might be able to influence al-Bashir to give the Muslim Brotherhood more space?
Well, Syria, of course, is a neighbor of Turkey. It would be surprising if a Turkish leader were not spending a great deal of time in Damascus, in the same sense that the United States and Mexico speak a great deal. And in the same sense, the United States and Mexico have problems over unrest in Mexico, over very different issues, of course. The Turks now have problems with unrest in Syria. They have very much wanted to have a stable Syria in order to stabilize their southern frontier. They have done what they could to produce that, but Syria is its own country, is now going through a period of tremendous instability. This is an example of one of the problems with the Turkish foreign policy, the desire to have no problems with any neighbors. Well, they have to have a problem with Syria now, because on the one hand, they have supported the Assad government and have tried to stabilize it up until the time of the unrest, to strengthen it. Now it has unrest from another direction, the Muslim Brotherhood and others who are unhappy with the government. It can't be friends with both, and it has to really make a decision on which side to come out. Turkey has moral issues of the kind of regime it wants to see. It also has practical issues. It can't afford to be enemies with Syria. And so on the one hand, it doesn't want to alienate the Assad regime in case Assad puts down the rising, which I think is a very strong possibility that he will. And on the other hand, it doesn't want to be supporting a despotic regime that collapses in the face of the rise of, say, the Muslim Brotherhood.
Another neighbour is Iraq. With the United States leaving Iraq, is there the possibility of Turkey filling this void?
Well, I mean, Iraq is certainly a far more significant problem because it has global implications. The United States is clearly withdrawing from Iraq. It has asked the Iraqis to invite them to remain. The Iraqis thus far have refused. Iraq, once the United States leaves, will, we expect, come heavily under the influence of the Iranians. The Turks want to have very good relations with the Iranians. They also don't want to see Iran dominating Iraq. If the Iranians dominate Iraq, that poses a problem to the Arabian Peninsula, to the Saudi regime. The Turks don't want to see that. At the same time, the Turks have no desire to involve themselves militarily beyond the northern areas where the Kurds are. So you have a fundamental decision facing the Turks in the event of an American withdrawal, which is likely to happen. What is the relationship going to be with the Iranians? And we really don't have any sense at this point that the Turks have confronted that problem very deeply.
Turning to the other side, the West, Turkey's relations with the United States and Europe have, to some extent at least, soured. The Turks feel they've been pushed aside by the EU. What will happen there?
The West doesn't know what to make of Turkey. Turkey, until recently, was a fairly predictable entity. During the Cold War, its enemy was the Soviet Union. The American enemy was the Soviet Union. Europe's enemy was the Soviet Union. There was a natural synergy between the various parties. The Cold War is over. The Soviet Union is not an enemy any longer. So we really have to look at the Turks in terms of what the major force in the region is, and that major force is rising Islam. It's inevitable that Turkey, as a Muslim country, is going to try to find its place in there, and as one of the leading Muslim countries, it will be called on to handle matters in the Islamic world. So the first thing that's happening is that Turkey is now far more interested in the Islamic world, for obvious reasons, geography, than it is in Europe. The European Union is still something it wants to join. The Europeans will not let it join because of immigration issues. But I think more to the point, Turkey doesn't really want to be a member of the EU for economic reasons. It is performing far better than almost all European countries are doing. And had it been part of the EU, I strongly suspect it would not have done as well. So it doesn't want that. As for the United States would like to see Turkey carry on its historic policy of being a surrogate for the United States in the region. And Turkey simply is not that weak and no longer needs to be that, nor does it have the same interest of the United States in the Islamic world. Many Americans, the Israelis, interpret this as Turkey going over to the radical Islamists. And I think that's a misreading of what Turkey is doing. I mean, what they are doing is repositioning themselves in a world that's changing in their own region. And in so doing, they're looking to redefine their relationships with other countries. The Americans and the Europeans don't know what to make of them, and therefore they sort of dismiss them and sort of demonize them. But from the Turkish point of view, what are they to do given who they are and where they live?
George, thank you. George Friedman, ending our agenda for this week. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.